Come come on in.
My name is Adam. I'm an alcoholic. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Fantastic. I want to thank the group. Thank you for inviting me to come talk tonight. It's always an honor and a privilege to be asked to participate in Alcoholics Anonymous. Ultimately, it's a responsibility to give back what was so freely given to me. Welcome to anybody that's new. If you're trying AA again, if you don't want to be here tonight, if you don't think Alcoholics Anonymous will work for you, I didn't get to AA because I had a bad weekend. I had a couple of bad decades. And for me, like a lot of us, eventually this becomes a matter of life and death. I mean, every meeting has their perpetual newcomer, especially if you live in a small community. I live in Los Angeles. We're actually the largest county in the United States with 10 million people by numbers. And we have about 3,000 meetings a week in the greater LA area. I stood up in AA as a newcomer for 17 years. I had so many chips and key tags. We know the drill, right? Could have played poker with them. I remember one secretary saying, "Give them back," and I did that walk of shame over and over and over again. And looking back at that experience now, if you're new, I thank God for the unconditional love of the old timers. A lot of the old timers in our area that aren't with us anymore. A lot of those old guys that died with 30, 40 years sober, and they watch me come in and out of the rooms, and they would say things to me like, "Don't even bother taking chips. Just sit in the back. Shut up." But in a loving way, right? But they made it really clear to me, and if you're new, I hope you hear this. They made it really clear to me that if and when I was ready, because somehow they could see it. Those old timers had the ability to see by my demeanor, my lack of interest, my fidgety nature. They seemed to have the wisdom to maybe just by my attitude through their experience see that it wasn't right now. But they were so kind and gracious to me, and they made it really clear to me that if and when I was ready, that the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous would always be open to a drunk like me. And I think looking back at that experience now, next to my parents, Alcoholics Anonymous is most likely the closest thing to unconditional love that an alcoholic like myself will ever experience. No matter how many people I burned, how many lives I destroyed, how many cars I wrecked, how many hearts I broke, how many jobs I lost, how many despicable, shameful things I did. And if you are, in fact, an alcoholic, it's the most shameful thing in the world to be the family drunk, especially if you come from a large family like I do. My mom had three sisters and a brother. My dad had three brothers and a sister. And she told them everything. One more rubber room, one more institution, one more car wreck, one more overdose. Happy birthday, Dad. I'm in jail. I mean, does anybody here relate to being paid not to go home on the holidays? I mean, that was my life. I mean, they saw it coming. They knew I was going to steal all the relatives' car keys and their cars, rob all the presents. I mean, they were just like, "Give me money. Please stay away from our house." And I look back at it now, and I was unable for the first decade of my recovery to see the annihilation of everything worthwhile. I couldn't see the destruction that I created because I was such a self-centered alcoholic. And that thing we always say, I'm only hurting myself. But to see now through the lens of Al-Anon, like life is lived forward and understood backwards, the kind of destruction that I created. I mean, I was, I, an only child. I was a straight A student. I was the top of all my classes. My mom and dad loved me. They weren't, that dysfunctional. They were married almost 50 years. And to watch my mother and father literally watch me burn my life to the ground, to the point where eventually my mom had sold the family property. She moved and she did not leave a forwarding address. That's where I left her. I just broke her heart. I broke both of their hearts. And, I look back at it now, and despite all of that, if you're new, the doors of AA have always been open to people like me. If I live to be 100 years old, I could never pay Alcoholics Anonymous back for the love and kindness, what some of you people have shown me, not all. I mean, if you like everybody in AA, you know what it means? It means you're probably not going to enough meetings. And I don't mean to be disrespectful or condescending, but I mean, we all know that AA is not the hotbed of mental health. And, you encounter people that are annoying and condescending and sarcastic and extremely difficult here. And, when I look back at it now, if I've learned anything in the 26 and a half years that I've been sober, I've learned how to be compassionate. That 4-step prayer. God, save me from being angry. This is a sick person. Help me to show pity, which is compassion. How can I not take things personally? And it's almost like if you pet a lion and it's got a thorn in its side, of course the lion's going to bite you. Every human being has a hidden thorn. Is it my job to point it out or pull it out? Absolutely not. And my sponsor said to me, you don't have to like anyone in particular in Alcoholics Anonymous, but as you go through the steps and traditions, you'll learn to love people here you don't even like. And when you see that annoying, difficult, sarcastic, condescending member of AA at a liquor store pissing in his pants, trying to get another drink, my heart still breaks for him. That thing, that unique thing that we have here, intimacy, into me I see, this thing, these famous words, yeah, me too. I felt like that. I drank like that. I thought like that. I was as hopeless. And I start to see how we are uniquely connected instead of being divisive. There's a part in the book where it says a real tolerance and respect for people's shortcomings, their viewpoints, their opinions is almost something that's necessary, an attitude that is absolutely vital to me being useful. And after all that being said, what happened to me is eventually I started coming to meetings drunk. Now, the interesting about Alcoholics Anonymous 2024, if you actually see a drunk person in a nice AA meeting these days, people say things like, oh my gosh, what's he doing here? I mean, ironic as it is, we don't see a lot of wet alcoholics in AA. And of course, I don't bash the therapeutic community. I know now it's a $35 billion a year industry, right? And for me, treatment would swoop me up in my most desperate moments, throw me into yoga. That's their answer, right? The downward dog, craft hour. I'm making belt buckles and bongs, right? Nature walks. It's funny. I walk to 7-Eleven, get a big gulp cup, fill it up with liquor, put a little Coke on top, walk back into the group, do some of my best sharing, and then I started going to treatment centers. And it's funny, we have a chapter in the book, if you're new, the chapter to wives. Anybody read the chapter to wives? It's interesting because part of the chapter to wives describes the progression of alcoholism, this idea of magic, medicine, misery, fun with problems, just problems. There's 100 ways to describe it. But it talks about these 4 types in the chapter to wives. And the 4th type that's described in the chapter to wives is the type of alcoholic that's been placed in one institution after another. Sound familiar? The type of alcoholic that typically drinks on his way home from the hospital. And in the 17 years that I recycled through Alcoholics Anonymous, albeit in one of the largest AA groups in the world, I still became that 4th type. By the time I finally got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, I'd gone through residential treatment for alcoholism 28 times. Not 28 days like the movie. This isn't Hollywood. 28 consecutive times. And for a time, I was wearing that like a badge of honor. I thought that's what made me an alcoholic. And I remember telling my late sponsor I'd gone through treatment 28 times. I was hoping that would get rid of the guy, loser. I had one of those overzealous sponsors chasing me around. Didn't want to ruin his batting average. And I remember him looking at me and he's saying, Adam, going through treatment 28 times, that doesn't make you an alcoholic. And I thought, you're kidding. He says, oh no, that just means you paid $500,000 for a big book. And I didn't think that was funny. And I'm not going to start citing and quoting pages tonight out of the big book. But page 101 of the big book says any scheme that attempts to shield the alcoholic from temptation is doomed to failure. See, treatment was a great place to fat me up for another run. Treatment has its rightful place in recovery. Even Bill Wilson had gone through treatment. Treatment probably saved my life. It might have slowed me down enough to maybe hear the message. If you ever wonder what all the treatment centers and religions do have in common, it's obvious. They all send their drugs to us, right? Some people don't go through treatment. It's not a prerequisite for Alcoholics Anonymous, but my experience for me is that treatment never solved the problem. And as an alcoholic, like a lot of us, I always thought the problem was liquor. I thought it was alcohol. And I remember someone in Alcoholics Anonymous saying to me, Adam, if alcohol's your problem, that drink, that shot glass, that 12 pack, that little glass of Chardonnay, if that's your problem, you're probably not an alcoholic. And then he paused, and in the very next breath, he said to me, and if you are in fact an alcoholic, the type that's described in the doctor's opinion in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, your problem is an alcohol. And I'm like, what? It took another decade, 10 more years of suffering for me to comprehend the impact of that statement. It was almost like some kind of cruel riddle. I drank over that for years. But what happened to me, and you hear that statement often, what happened? What happened to me is I got around a group of big book literalists, people in Alcoholics Anonymous that took the statements in the big book, turned them into questions, directed the questions at me. Very simple ideas. Like, was I incapable of being honest with myself? Did I, in fact, drink because I like the effect produced by alcohol? Well, duh, that's a no brainer, right? How about this if you're new? Was I restless, irritable, and discontent by nature? Was that my natural state before my lips ever touched it? Very powerful question. Was my greatest obsession that somehow, someday, I would control and enjoy my drinking at the same time? And the last piece, did I pursue that illusion to the gates of insanity and death? And as I went through those considerations, if you're new, if you're like me, what happened? Because you hear that statement a lot. What happened? What happened is for the first time I saw the truth. And the most obvious truth, what we call the external unmanageability, was crystal clear. From the time I was in middle school, I'm in 8th grade and I'm already pissing in my pants. I was already drooling on my desk. I was already passed out under the bleachers. I overshot the mark from the first time my lips touched alcohol. My nickname in 8th grade was Space Cadet. I couldn't find homeroom. People were picking high schools. I was already picking rehab. But if you're new tonight, alcoholism comes in people. It doesn't come in bottles or 6-packs or 12-packs or kegs or shot glasses or little $100 bottles of wine. Alcoholism comes in people. And the greater aspect of this spiritual illness, as Bill Wilson describes it, centering in my mind, if going through the considerations in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous shows me anything at all, it shows me that an alcoholic of my type, an alcoholic of this type, cannot really live without alcohol, not successfully, not happily. And part of what it seems to me for me to be an alcoholic, if I'm honest about my relationship with liquor, is that I have a mind that will consistently take me back to that first drink. Every time I get released from an emergency room, a fancy Malibu treatment center, a hospital, then Central Jail, 5743, roll it up. It's amazing to me. I've been in county jail countless times. And one more time, I'm sitting in my little cell on my cot, casually reading a novel, not a cloud on the horizon. And suddenly I hear that number, 5743, roll it up. And I have this compulsion in me that is so powerful that I can't even stop at the release module for my property. As soon as I hear that release number, no matter how long I've been incarcerated, there is this compulsion in me that is so powerful. And I don't mean to say this, but I come to AA and people say things to me like, well, don't drink no matter what. And I know they mean well. And for many people, that may be true. But my experience after reading the book and being a literate person, I had a degree when I came to AA. I remember my sponsor said thermometers have degrees. You know where they put those? But when I hear that statement, don't drink no matter what, I say, what happened at the top of page 24 where it says verbatim, every alcoholic passes through the state where even the strongest desire is of absolutely no avail. It says, for me, my willpower will become virtually non-existent. And when I hear a statement like that, there has to be a translation for someone like me. And what it seems to be is go to meetings no matter what, work steps no matter what, maintain commitments no matter what, be of service no matter what. Develop this discipline of steps 10, 11, and 12, which are peace, power, and purpose, respectively, no matter what. And what it says is so fascinating. The doctor's opinion says, as strange as this may seem to those who do not understand. Once a psychic change has occurred, this very same person, me, who seemed absolutely doomed, is suddenly easily able to control their desire for alcohol. What a powerful thing that is. You know, it's like I got a car outside that's got no brakes. I know this car's got no brakes. Every time I take that car out and I put it in gear, it runs into an emergency room, it runs into a hospital, it runs into a police car, it runs into a courtroom. I know the car's got no brakes. With all the knowledge that that car's got no brakes, there is something that compels me to sit in that car and think about all the places I'm going to go. And all the therapy, all the psychiatry, all the MFTs, all the medication will never put brakes in that car. That's what it means to be powerless. And unless I can have this entire psychic change, a complete shift in the way that I interpret and process my reality, I am absolutely doomed, just like the doctor's opinion says. A lot of people know they're powerless over the second drink, but that's not what it's saying. What seems to happen to me is I have this mind that somehow will convince me. In fact, I deteriorate at such a spiritual level that my own mother looks at me and says, for God's sake, son, drink, you are nicer. Have a cigarette while you're at it. And my experience, if you're new, is that unless I can develop that sense of comfort and ease that I'm seeking from alcohol through this spiritual process, a drunk like me will never stay here. It was critical that I see that. It's almost like alcohol does so much for me, I don't care what it's doing to me. I mean, if you think about it, alcohol is classified by the AMA as a depressant. 9 out of 10 people, they have a couple drinks and they say things like, oh my gosh, I got to slow down. I'm feeling it. I have work tomorrow. I have a couple drinks. I want to get married. Right? I'm trying to find the car keys I hid for myself before the first drink. See, for me, alcohol is a stimulant. And unless I can develop that sense of comfort and ease that I'm seeking from alcohol through this spiritual process, a drunk like me will never stay here. If you take booze away from me, you have to give me something better. And if you're new, I think in many ways that seems to be what it is with me. That I have this mind that seems to continue to take me back to alcohol. Now Jay knows where I live. I live on the west side of Los Angeles. This is an area now called Silicon Beach. And it's almost like, I sponsor a lot of these really smart guys that program computers. A lot of them are engineers. They speak foreign languages like Python and Java, but that they're alcoholic. Now, here's some math for the smart people. I know a lot of people on this meeting tonight. Potential plus alcoholism equals 0. Kind of like the quadratic formula. So sponsor a lot of these guys. They come in, they're far my intellectual superior. And we talk about the language that Bill Wilson uses in 1939 and how really advanced it was for that time period. Because we use the word program today often. It's common vernacular. It wasn't so much so in 1939. But one of the definitions of the word program, if you look it up in the dictionary, is very simple. It's a sequential set of instructions, right? Designed to do what? Designed to bring about a result. Now listen to the parallel language. What do you do when you get a corrupt file on the computer? It's obvious. You install a recovery disk, and the function of that disk is to restore that program to an earlier point in the process. The second step, the original self. The self that's not corrupted by fear, not corrupted by selfishness, not corrupted by dishonesty, the inner narrative, the lies I tell myself, that faulty emotional attachment we call resentment. See, if you're like me, 10 and 11, if I follow these very simple instructions, what happens is 10 and 11 become like the viral scan. That when I get to 10, I become mindful. I become accountable. I become transparent. For the first time in my life, I become responsible. I'm able to see where I paint the red flags green. I'm able to navigate around the drama. Who knew that I could bookend my day at the end of the day? I could go through this very simple process. Resentment, fear, selfishness, dishonesty. I could turn to someone I could help. I could transparently, right, discuss it with another person, to be accountable. And then to do these upon awakening prayers. And what happens is I start to develop this type of spiritual fitness. Safe, sane, and sober. There's 100 ways to say this. But it never occurred to me, if you're new, that when Bill Wilson talks about principles before personalities, it's so fascinating. By 1942, Bill had said our chief responsibility to the newcomers an adequate presentation of the program of recovery. He saw by then that we had deviated into so many other ideas that had nothing to do with these very simple instructions. I love the fellowship of AA, and I'm in a place where we have every night I can go to meetings with 300-400 people. Jay knows, all over our city. We've got, I mean, just this is AA Disneyland. But the fellowship, like it says, it gives me enthusiasm, it gives me inspiration, it gives me encouragement, it gives me hope, brotherly love. Some people find relationships and employment here. But the book talks about it. It says the fellowship is but one element in the powerful cement that binds us. And there's a warning. It said it would have never held us together as we were now joined. And what happens to me is without guiding principles, I start to actually get sicker in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. My character defects have a tendency to thrive. And what happens to me, consciously or subconsciously, is I start to become separate, different, and alone, just like I did when I was drinking. If you haven't heard that terminology, it means separated from God. It means different than every single person here. We call that terminal uniqueness. We've all heard it. And alone, you know, that loneliness, that ache in the heart of every one of us that really has nothing to do with the proximity or closeness of other people. That loneliness at the core of my soul, when I hit that pillow at night, if you have that like I do, what that is my inability to connect. And you put a couple drinks in me, I'm calling people from 5th grade saying, I love you. God, I go right into a mess. I mean, put a couple drinks in me, I'm standing on the roof of my building howling at the moon. I'm at one with the universe. A couple more drinks, I lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in my fellows. See, alcohol for me produces, again, the illusion that my life is manageable. And unless I can develop that sense of comfort and ease through this simple process, a drunk like me will never stay here. And right next to being separate, different, and alone, there seems to be these 3 pillars of recovery. The first is to be protected by some kind of God, the second to be accepted by self, and the third to be connected to a community. And it's funny because you hear it in a vision for you, right? Abandon yourself to God as you understand God. It's the last thing he says. 1 through 3, admit your faults to him and your fellows. 4 through 7, clear away the wreckage of your past. I mean, if you abandon a ship, you can't get back on it, right? I go to the ocean with a cup, I get a cup full of water. What if I go to the ocean with my whole life? When I came at Alcoholics Anonymous and I said, take all of me, you hear it. We ask for his care and protection in chapter 5 with what? Complete abandon, that first piece. The second, to be accepted by self, 4 through 7. And what that means, if you're new, is after going through that process, I no longer need internal or external validation. I develop what's called an internal locus of control. You can look it up on your phone after the meeting. And the third piece, to be connected to a community, protected by God, accepted by self, connected to a community. And I go from being the weakest link in my family. And, you know, like Native Americans, they talk about many of us are like up to 14 generations of dysfunction. My mom's brother committed suicide drunk. My father's brother committed suicide drunk. I come from a long line of suicide, mental illness, and alcoholism. And to be 26 and a half years away from that now and be the strongest link in that community because I did some inventory, I faced and been rid of the things in me that were blocking me. I was able to, for the first time in my life, reconcile the difference between the way I think these ought to be and the way they actually are. That emergence between theory and reality, that all of a sudden I can develop spiritual fitness. It is said that alcoholism is the only disease, when treated, that will actually leave the sufferer in a better position than if they never had the disease. I'd have never believed it. I would have never believed that. And I was well educated. And I remember my sponsor sat with me in front of a hospital and he said to me, how free do you want to be, Adam? Do you want to be free enough to just survive this? So he said, do you want to get by or do you want to get better? He said, free enough to chase your dreams, free enough to have relationships that work, free enough to navigate around the drama, free enough to match calamity with serenity, free enough to stay in fit spiritual condition. And I heard, I felt, I saw something in him that was indescribable. He was centered. He was a tough guy, and he said, true strength is gentleness. Such a great person. I had really wonderful mentors and sponsors, and I know that would have never been the case had I not been teachable. I had to get to a place of humility. Humility plus service, right? These ideas create a posture of gratitude. Gratitude is a spiritual condition. It is something that I can cultivate over time through action. And I didn't understand that very simple idea. I look back at 17 years of failure again in one of the largest AA groups in the world. And if you're new, what I see is my defiance towards spiritual principles. The original manuscript in the big book says, rarely have we seen a person fail that's thoroughly followed our directions. That's the way it was originally written. Now, if you're like me, I don't like directions. In fact, I don't like being told not to do something I already don't want to do. Sound familiar? I will argue with anybody about anything at any time. You tell me it's black, I'll tell you it's white. You tell me it's big, I'll tell you it's small. You tell me to go left, I'll go right with an attitude, right? That's why we say denial is an acronym. It stands for don't even notice I am lying. Think about it. You can tell an alcoholic, but you can't tell them much. Oh, you don't believe it? Try sponsoring somebody. And what that means, if you're new, is you can lead me into the gates of hell, but you cannot push me into heaven. So when we talk about attraction rather than promotion in the tradition, what that came to mean to someone like me is eventually I would come back to Alcoholics Anonymous on my own terms. Not because Sober Living wanted me to, not because my parole officer wanted me to, not because DCSF thought it was a good idea. I mean, I live on the west side of Los Angeles. Everyone comes to AA for the trust fund now. I mean, they all come into meetings in the limousines, and it's like, it's really hard to watch that because there's the bottom is very different for someone like that. And even Father Martin used to say the 4 things that block a newcomer from recovery are wealth, health, youth, and brains. And I had every single one of those. And every one of those was an impediment to me recovering in Alcoholics Anonymous. That defiance towards spiritual principles. And, for me, my experience now is that hope doesn't matter to a drunk like me until I'm hopeless. You think hope matters to me when I got $1 million left in the bank, brand new Harley, little truck in the driveway, boat down in the marina? You wouldn't catch me dead at an AA. And if you're new, my experience is that God didn't matter to me until my back was against the wall. And this isn't gutter bravado. What happened to me, and this was very close to my bottom, is I got shot in a little argument because I don't understand the word no, and it went right through me. And I'm laying on the gurney, and I've got the paramedics over me with the little paddles. And it's so funny because all I know is God. If you've ever been in a situation where a person is confronted by their mortality, there's only 2 things men try for: mommy and God, right? I mean, think about it. You got your head in the toilet every morning. Anybody here had the dry heaves? Every morning I had my head in the toilet, puking my guts out. Who prays more than drunks like us? Come on. And what's so interesting about that is, Bill Wilson, in Bill's story, he talks about having this powerful white light experience. And on the very next page, it said it was quickly blotted out by worldly clamors, most of which were within himself. I remember I'm in the cardiologist's office in the emergency room, right? I've just been shot, and they stick a tampon right through my chest. That's the way they deal with gunshot wounds. And, I've literally seen my entire life flash before me. I've gone from nursery school to that day in like 30 seconds. And my only thought is, God, I wish I could say goodbye to my beautiful mother. And the doctor does an angiogram. And he runs a cord through my groin, and he pumps this dye through my heart on the TV screen. And he looks at me and he smiles and he says, "The bullet missed. You're going to be fine." And I went from, at that moment, never being closer to God than I've ever been in my life. There was this complete and absolute submission to the universe. And the very next thought was, I need to get out of this hospital before law enforcement shows up. It was that quick. And the reason I think about that often with newcomers is because there's a huge difference between the act of surrender that gets newcomers into Alcoholics Anonymous, right? There's only three ways we get here: crisis, intervention, and we just get tired. The first two don't work for someone like me. But there's a huge difference between the act of surrender that got me into AA over and over and over and over again, and the state of surrender that's keeping the old timers here. It's a totally different concept if you're new. It's almost like watching a swan glide across a pond of still water. So beautiful, so effortless, so graceful. But we all know what that swan's doing under the water. He's paddling like hell. And if you're new, we have a chapter in the big book, which is there for a reason, into action. Anybody notice there's no chapter into feelings? I know the therapists hate it. There's no chapter into thinking. But what my sponsor asked me to do immediately was to look at that triangle: recovery, unity, and service, and consider those to be actions. I mean, in the clinical world, there's a concept called cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. In AA, it's $1, and it basically is saying I can't think my way into right living, but I can live my way into right thinking. And he said to me, that triangle has three fundamental ideas. Recovery, unity, and service stands for contribute, belong, and learn. The more I contribute, the more I feel needed, the more I belong, the more I feel wanted, the more I uncover, discover, and discard that which is blocking me from God's self and others, the more that I can bilaterally give and receive love. It's a very simple idea. It's like if there was a weight pile in the middle of the room and everything I lifted weight for 2 hours, I'd get strong. It doesn't matter how I feel or what I think. And what I was asked to do in Alcoholics Anonymous from the very beginning was to start taking actions I did not yet believe in. And those actions over a period of time started to change my perception of reality. I think there's this book called Your Brain on AA, and it was right around the time of neuroplasticity and the theory that the landscape of the map of the brain could change through thoughts and actions. It's almost like normal people are intellect over emotion. They think, they process, and they act. I'm exactly the opposite. I'm emotion over intellect. I act, process, and then think. Oops, 10th step. I mean, it's funny how we're the only people that burn bridges ahead of us. And when Bill talks about it, or Dr. Silkworth was a pioneer of it, unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's very little hope of his recovery. And what happened to me is I got around these people that were into action. They were taking actions that I didn't believe in, but I took the actions. And what happens is I started to have this change. It's very simple. I'll simplify it. My head, my heart, and my feet need to be moving in the same direction. My head is the steps, my heart is service, my feet are meetings. Very, very simple ideas. And those actions, again, started to change the way I integrated with my reality. It's just that simple. You know, if you're new, thank God we don't look like our stories. Because what happened, here's that word again, what happened is I got to one more treatment center, right? I was 120 pounds. I was dying of alcoholism. I stunk like urine. My fingers were dirty. And I'm in this treatment center in my nightgown with my ass hanging out, judging the speaker. It's so funny how we're the only people that can literally be on the curb and still look down at the world, right? I got two speeds, grandiose and comatose. And I'm strutting around the detox, bragging about Robin Brink's truck. I finally did my fourth step. It was a bread truck, and it was empty. So sitting there in the treatment center with my fellow associates, and this woman comes in on an H&I panel. If you're new, H&I stands for hospitals and institutions. It's also known as homies and inmates. But our H&I on the West Side, Jay knows, we get about 200 people that meet once a month in this room, and they're fighting each other to talk to people in treatment centers that don't care. But I think H&I has probably one of the lowest relapse rates in all of recovery. So this woman's on this H&I panel. We're in the audience. She comes into the treatment center. She does her AA talk. And at the end of her talk, she looks us all up and down and she says, If I could give you all the gift of recovery, I wouldn't do it. And I looked at her and I remember looking at the guy next to me and I said, what a bitch. And no disrespect, this is what she said. After I said that, she said, the reason I wouldn't give you the gift of recovery is because I wouldn't rob you of the journey. And all these years later, I've come to understand that that journey to recovery, just like that journey to surrender that each and every alcoholic has to walk if you're new, it's personal. We can't give you that. I could write all day long on step one until I'd beaten down that liquor store door at 5:59 a.m. over and over and over and over again, or paid the clerk at 7-Eleven $100 for a six-pack after closing, or done all those despicable, diabolical, disgusting things that many of us do on that journey to pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. You think writing about step one was going to enhance my experience? I had to have an experience with hopelessness. I always thought desperation and hopelessness were the same thing. They're not. You know what fixes desperation? A $10,000 check from mommy. We have this men's group on Wednesday night in Beverly Hills, and we get about 400 guys in there. And, a guy will get up and, they always have the new guy share first. And this new guy will get up and he'll say, oh, last night I got a drunk driving. And he'll literally get a standing ovation. And then he'll say, oh, and my wife broke my nose with a frying pan. He'll get another standing ovation. And then he says, oh, I got a promotion at work. And everyone's like, oh, no. And it's so funny, like how we kind of laugh at the oddest things here. But in Bill's story, it says, to my fortune, my business associates remained skeptical, during which the first 2 years he found little work at all. Why would Bill say that? Because I had to understand that desperation can be fixed. Hopelessness cannot. I'm sitting in $1 million house on a piss-soaked mattress with every resource at my disposal, and I knew the next drink would kill me, and I still couldn't stop myself from doing it. That's hopeless. And I believe for me, like a lot of people I work with, unless I can really understand that hopelessness, I'll never recover. I had to completely submit to that idea. And, we talk about that gift of desperation being a great acronym for God, but, what happened to me, and again, it's not God or bravado. I got to a place in my life where my head couldn't get enough and my body couldn't take anymore. I was just down on Skid Row last night speaking at a panel. And, when my head can't get enough and my body can't take it anymore, God means something very different. It means grow or die. Then it becomes very practical. It's not a theory at that point. I'm faced with two basic alternatives, right? Suddenly my hand's going to be forced. That's why we talk about this is providence. This is circumstance. It's not virtue. I'm either going to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of my intolerable situation. Skid Row's full of people like that. And what's the other alternative? Accept spiritual help. And it's fascinating. It says these are not easy alternatives. My gosh, if you did a survey at Costco, you got jails, institutions, and death, happy, joyous, and free. What's your choice to be? It's a no-brainer. You step over to my cell in Men's Central Jail, you ask me that question, and I'm thinking, gosh, how bad an alcoholic that? Can I talk to my counselor, my therapist, my parole officer, my MFT, my counselor, my attorney, and get back to you on Monday? And I will justify, minimize, and rationalize my right to drink. That's why when the doctors have been talked about us being in full flight from reality, outright mental defectives, and argued about that, my said, let's look at the ways you defend your right to drink. The first half of step one, me defending my right to drink. The rest of my life, me defending my right to play God. It's obvious I got a car with no brakes. Every time I take it out of gear, I run into an emergency room. I run into a police car. I run into a courtroom. That's what it means to be powerless. I got a car with no brakes. And all the therapy, all the psychiatry, all the MFTs, all the medication will never put brakes in that car. And what I didn't understand is if you're new, the bottom is the same for all of us. From Yale to jail, Park Avenue to Park Bench, what the real bottom and the catalyst to my recovery is twofold. It's when I ask for help, but more importantly, when I'm actually willing to receive it. You know how many people come to AA looking for help? That's why the recovery rate has changed since the beginning. Because people aren't desperate like they were before. They have every other option available to them. But the two ideas, when I ask for help and when I'm actually willing to receive it, is a very simple concept if you're new. It's like I throw you a life raft and you look at the life raft and you say, you know what? I was looking for a blue one. I really don't like the way you threw it. And what happened to me is eventually, after I exhausted every other idea, I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous, just like going to that ocean and saying, God, take all of me, with complete abandon. And all of a sudden, it worked. It absolutely worked 100% perfectly. The doctor's opinion, very little time left. It talks about Silkworth, by the way. It's very interesting. When I got out of that 28th residential treatment center, the guy that was running the detox said to me, Adam, why don't you come back to our lovely hospital next week and tell all the patients here how you managed to stay sober an entire week if you could make it. And then the guy removed me from his property. And I was so offended. You know, we're sensitive when we're new. I was so really offended and resentful
5 minutes.
I acknowledged that for the next 8.5 years, I sat in 2 hours of bumper to bumper traffic from South LA County to the West Valley to tell a bunch of strangers in a detox how I managed to stay sober, and I was tricked into service. But what's so interesting about that is in Bill's story, Bill got to a place where, you know, he had lost everything in life worthwhile. He was plagued with waves of depression. And Bill got a real simple idea. Maybe if I go back in the hospital and talk to some of the patients, I'll feel better. Very simple idea. And we know the story. Called Dr. Silkworth. Silkworth, by the way, was a double board certified physician. He treated, if you look Dr. Silkworth up on Wikipedia, he treated over 40,000 alcoholics. He came out of Princeton, he went to Bellevue, and then he went to Towns Hospital. But he says, with all our ultra-modern standards, our scientific approach, we're not well equipped. He couldn't fix people like us. They can't fix me now. And he allowed Bill Wilson to come into Towns Hospital and talk to patients. And what Silkworth witnessed from 1935 to 1939, he said, and you can read it in the doctor's opinion, he said, the cases we followed are most interesting. Many of them are amazing. He was so amazed that that first endorsement in the doctor's opinion where it says you can absolutely rely on anything these men say about themselves, that was a letter of credibility given to Bill Wilson by a double board certified physician on the Towns Hospital letterhead. And what happened to Bill was so powerful because Bill was so broken that he developed what's called a servant's heart. All his life, you can read the story. He was grandiose, he was sensitive, he was omnipotent, right? And what happened to him is he became not only teachable, but he became willing. It's like there's two kinds of people. There's guests and there's hosts. The guest is never happy. There's no onions on my burger. I don't like to rent a car. I asked for a king size bed. What did you get me for my birthday? The guest is never happy. But see, the host comes at life very differently. How can I be helpful? See, the book talks about it. Our real purpose is to be of maximum service to God and the people about me. Wayne Dyer said it better than anybody. He said, we come to this earth with absolutely nothing. We leave with absolutely nothing. There's only one thing right we can do here. Give it all away. And you know what? He didn't mean the money, because I know the capitalists and the materialists think, oh my God, I can't give it all away. But you know what? What we have in this organization of Alcoholics Anonymous is a way to give everything away. My experience, my strength, and my hope. That's what we give here. These are the intangibles. And by doing that, like my old friend Clancy said, and I'll finish with this, he said, alcoholics need to be useful more than they'll ever need to be loved. And my sponsor said the 12 steps are like the face of a clock. When you're in 12, you have to be in one with a new person, experiencing the craving, the obsession, the malady, the agnosticism, the resistance, the inventory, the defects, the amends, and so on, and help them to develop this discipline of 10, 11, and 12, which is the solution. If restless, irritable, and discontent is the problem, right? Which is irritability of the mind, restlessness of the body, and discontentment of the spirit, then peace in 10, power in 11, and purpose in 12 have to be the answer. If selfishness and self-centered is the problem, the solution is service-centered, other-centered, and God-centered. And if you're new, find somebody that can take you through the book and show you how to have that transformation. And I promise you, when we talk about entering the world of the spirit, you will find not only have you won the spiritual lotto, but the rest of your life will be heaven on earth. I promise you that. I promise you that. Thank you very much.
Yay. Oh my God, everybody join me in thanking Adam. Adam, I love you so much. Let me
Thank you.
let me